All right. Well, welcome back. And we are just incredibly lucky to get Troy Hunt in his mobile command post somewhere off the shore of, where are you right now, Troy?
I don't know. I think we might be lost. There's a lot of water. I just tweeted a photo of it.
Fantastic. So, Troy, thank you so much for being part of this BeerCom One and lending your brand and your help to the Forbes article with Kate. That was just tremendous. Um, what do we need to know about 2019? What are sort of the key takeaways from your perspective, especially on the data breach issue? Are we really bad at cloud?
Yes. Look, I mean, I'm hesitant to sort of say we're really bad at cloud. I mean, cloud is just amazing at all these, doing all these fantastic things. Yeah, because people have been paying as if they've got cloud and they've got cheap resources and all that sort of thing. But it also makes it easier to screw stuff up faster than what we've ever done before as well, faster and more cheaper than what we've ever done before. And I think one of the big things we sort of saw during this year was the emergence of not even just the emergence, but the growth of like large data aggregator breaches. You know, these
Yeah.
organizations that I've never heard of before, that most people have heard of before. And then suddenly it's like, yeah, here's X number of hundreds of millions of accounts. They've got your data. I don't know where they got my data from. It certainly wasn't my idea from having data, but here it is, and it's all over the place. And a lot of that is facilitated by the ubiquity of cheap, easily accessible cloud.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, do you feel this is sort of the last gasps of data in the hands of folks that just are not putting any protection in? Uh, are you seeing an impact from data protection laws like GDPR?
Not really, and I think there's sort of a few key things here. So, you know, in terms of being the last gasp, but I think what we're just seeing now is a new normal. I mean, the whole
Yeah.
premise of somehow being able to have control over your data, certainly as it relates to sort of individual attributes. I mean, let's say there's the sort of stuff that gets scraped off LinkedIn and all the other places. We really don't have any control over that, and I think it's
Yeah.
just a combination of so much data being out there, so cheap to stand up, and data itself being such a valuable commodity that these organisations are going to keep popping up. So there's, that's certainly happening. And then as it relates to the likes of GDPR, upcoming legislation in California, which is going to hopefully give us a lot more privacy, the problem is it really doesn't have much teeth as it relates to data aggregators operating, particularly in the US at the moment. I mean,
Right.
one of the things I really lament about, I mean, there are many things I lament about GDPR, one being that I don't get any protection. So,
Yeah.
it's like, fine for you guys. Actually, do you get it after Brexit? That was an interesting question. Anyway, so, there's sort of different views of the rights and privacies of individuals depending on where you are in the world. But the other thing as well is the chances of an EU regulator actually going over to some state in the US and being able to successfully mount a case against some fly-by-night data aggregator are just frankly not very good. And
Yeah.
it's sort of interesting to see the feedback from local regulators in the EU when people have tried to go to town on these organisations. And I've got multiple messages from people where the regulators said, look, basically, as of now, it's just in a too hard button. Different story if it's like Facebook, right?
Right.
If it's Joe and Jane's fly-by-night data aggregation services.com. So
Yeah.
good luck with that.
So, and you bring up a really valid point in that, global companies with their incredible reach and their incredible power, I think Australia and Canada and some other countries have attempted to take them to task, but it seems like, when they have a $5 billion dollar bank account that they've already allocated to fines, does it feel a little disingenuous that they're taking your privacy seriously when they're prepared to pay any fine that the planet can hand them?
I think this is just one of these things where it's important to recognise different aspects to this. So, on the one hand, we're sort of saying, okay, you've got this situation where you've got very large organisations with huge amounts of data and, these bastards are going and they're selling it and they're monetizing it and everything. And then on the other hand, we're all sitting here going, I'd really like to have free access to Facebook and
Yeah.
Google and it. Like, well, you know how that's possible. So I think we run the risk of just being a little bit myopic if we focus too much on one side of that debate.
Right.
So from my perspective, I almost like to sort of take a stance of neutrality and go, look, there are different angles to this. I can see the different sides of the argument, and the right answer probably lies somewhere in the middle of the extremes between the privacy side of things and the fact that people do actually want access to these services.
I think it's really great that you're talking about this, because I know that Australia and other countries are looking at trying to institute some sort of cryptological backdoor. I would imagine that you're pretty adamant that there is no such thing as a cryptological backdoor that wouldn't be abused by a malicious actor. Is that something, is that a position that you're advocating for really publicly?
Well, I think this is actually a perfect example of what I was just saying, in terms of there are usually two ends of the extreme, and the reality is somewhere in between. Yeah, Australia made a lot of news, particularly going back about a year, because of our Systems and Access Bill, which was basically the government saying, hey, there's a lot of cryptography out there these days. Bad people, terrorists, pedophiles, this sort of thing, have the ability to go through and have encrypted communications with greater ease than ever before. And it actually makes us really hard to do our job. And when you sort of listen to it in that perspective and go, well, yeah, actually, I can see that would be really hard. And I like not getting blown up and all these sorts of things. It's like, okay, there's one side of the argument, which is very valid. And then, of course, the other side of the argument is that we all want privacy. I want to be able to talk about everything from what I'm going to have for dinner through to business deals, whatever else it may be, with privacy, and any weakening of cryptographic systems puts that at risk. As far as it goes in terms of Australia as well, we've sort of seen the government saying absolutely ridiculous stuff. We heard our Prime Minister at the time saying that the law of mathematics is admirable, but the only law that matters in Australia is law of Australia. I mean, come on, mate, that is not smart. You know? And then on the other hand, we see news headlines saying Australia's banning cryptography or banning security, and that's ridiculous as well. The government's actually been very explicit and said we do not want to weaken encryption, we do not want backdoors. So what does that leave? Does that leave, let's say, court orders with appropriate overview, where the only time we're going to actually see cases where government gets access to any communications is when there is due process, and it's not going to be a weakening encryption. It might be that they get access to the device. Maybe they get access to a device backup from Apple, for example. Now, of course, they're not going to talk about exactly what that looks like either. This is kind of the nature of what they do. So I sort of, again, come back to this middle ground. It's like, I can see both sides of the discussion, and I think that companies need to be part of the discussion about how they help law enforcement, but it's not going to be breaking encryption or backdoors, and it's also not going to be doing nothing either, because we do want the protections we get from law enforcement.
That's right. Yeah, it's that whole juxtaposition between national security and privacy that it causes governments to look very duplicit in a lot of cases. Moving to, I guess, a big project of yours, Have I Been Pawned? You are in the process of divesting yourself from Have I Been Pawned. Is it sort of like seeing your child go off to college, or what is sort of, what are your feelings around that? Because it's been a huge part of your life.
Yeah. You know, having two children as well, it is all the highs and lows of having children going through this process.
Yeah.
So look, that's something which is still ongoing. I mean, as with children, there's a whole bunch of stuff which is harder than expected, and there are a whole bunch of things I didn't expect to sort of go through. But it is something, as with the children as well, which is still an ongoing process, and something I hope I'll be able to talk about more in the near future. But as you can imagine, there's a whole bunch of reasons why there's certain things I can't say at the moment, other than that I'm happy with the way things are proceeding, and I think 2020 is going to be a really good year. And just to be clear as well, when we say divesting, it's one thing to find a new home for Have I Been Pawned. It's another thing not to be involved, and I will absolutely positively be involved for multiple years after this thing goes through. I don't want to leave it. I enjoy doing it. I just want more help with it.
I gotcha. And you know what? Thanks for clarifying that, because I think there's a fair amount of unease about that, and it's certainly a service that governments now and large companies and small companies are relying on. And I guess, you know, there's that sense that that maybe the carpet's going to be tugged out a bit. So I think I appreciate that assurance. Now, as a guy that travels the world doing all sorts of different things, you seem to be very fond of Norway. What is going on in the Nordics that you really enjoy, and why is that sort of the place that you like to spend your time in?
Well, I've been going there a lot for the last probably 5 years, for particularly for the NDC conference, and then I've been there a lot in the middle of the year for NDC, and then in January when I'll be there again this coming January for NDC security as well. And look, it's just a really cool, chilled out place. I've got a lot of friends there. It's really accessible to the rest of Europe, so that's sort of made it a sensible place to spend a bit more time in. And look, I mean that's another thing I'll talk much more about in the future as well.
Okay, well, that's really, really exciting. Do you see, like, obviously from your perspective, when you get to travel all these different places, do you see any sort of one area or region being a little bit more progressive or a little bit more exciting when it comes to cybersecurity, or do you kind of see it from the perspective of we're just struggling everywhere?
Look, I think the latter's true. Like we're definitely struggling everywhere. I went to Israel for the first time this year, actually, and Israel is a real hotbed of infosec. Largely, it seems because everyone in Israel has to go through national service, and they build out some really, really strong infosec capabilities there. So there's a lot of big security companies that have come out of Israel. Mm-hmm. So I went and spoke at a conference there. When was it? June, July, somewhere thereabouts, and spent a bunch of time visiting organisations as well. So I found that quite fascinating. And of course, they're in a part of the world where military and defence, which is becoming closer and closer to, dare we say, cyber security. These two things are much more analogous to each other these days. So I found that a really interesting place to go to this year.
It's cool. And I mean, obviously, when you go places, people know kind of who you are and what you're all about. Was there a sense of sort of discovering new friendships and relationships? Because I know that Israel has been very welcoming to security researchers.
Yeah, look, they were super welcoming there, but it's pretty much the same all over the world, right? Where you go along to these events, and particularly as people start to know you a little bit better, people are always really welcoming. I mean, I'm literally sitting in a boat in the middle of a harbour now, not in the middle of a harbour, in the middle of a bay, drinking beer, swimming with a whole bunch of people. I got out of the water for this call, obviously, but swimming around with a whole bunch of people for the OWL conference, it's the same sort of thing, right? Where you just meet a whole bunch of people that have heard of the things you do, and it's just really nice to take those sort of online digital experiences and turn them into some real world relationships.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So what is your advice now to people that are just starting out in this information security world? Like, what do you see as the key to their future success?
Look, I think a lot of it, and certainly what's always worked for me, is just getting out and trying a whole bunch of things and doing stuff until you figure out what sticks. I mean, even InfoSec for me, I've got a software background. Yeah. InfoSec was the thing that I tried and the thing that ultimately ended up sticking. So I reckon a little bit of variety is the spice of life kind of stuff, right? So, go out and keep swinging the bat until you find something that you hit. And if you do that, I think that sort of maximizes your opportunities for success. And to be clear, I mean, there's lots of different measures of success. Success for you might be just doing something that you absolutely love and enjoy. Or success might be making a pile of money, or whatever else it may be that drives you. Go out and keep trying until you find the thing that helps you achieve it.
Find your passion and stick with it.
Absolutely.
So obviously 2020 will see a lot more Troy Hunt doing fabulous things in fabulous countries. Are there any stones unturned, Troy, that you'd like to accomplish? Like, I think you've spoken at all the major conferences. Have you done a DEF CON talk?
I went to DEF CON this year. I didn't do a DEF CON talk. And to be honest, I actually kind of enjoed going to an event and not having any responsibilities. So
especially
we'll
in
see.
Vegas.
I had fun in Vegas. They are other stories we won't go into here.
Right.
but yeah, look, in 2020, I don't know. You know, it's I never sort of plan that far ahead of, other than a few sort of key events that I do every year. I really haven't planned much beyond about February.
What are the top
At
ones
the moment.
what are the top ones that you tend to return to or are on your must go?
Yeah, I mean, the top ones are the NDC events, which again is right here down back to Norway a couple of times every year. They look after the speakers amazingly well. They're great audiences. They're cool parts of the world. So I'll be doing NDC security in Oslo next month, and then straight after that I'll be doing NDC in London. And also for folks that are in either of those places, I'm going to have my 10-year-old son with me, and we're going to be running a kids code club together as well. So as he sort of gets a bit older and he's showing a real interest in this industry as well, I'm really excited about spending more time with him at events and giving him the opportunity to do some of the things I do. So,
well, I hope he has his Qantas and his British Airlines frequent flyer numbers already.
He might be racking up some points. He did actually do a talk in London in January of this year. Actually, he did a talk about how he learned to code. So, you know, this I think this is a really, really exciting you know, phase of life for me as a parent, and also for him as a kid to have access to this. And so again, if anyone's listening from either London or Oslo, there's free events. Just Google NDC Security Oslo or NDC London and sign up and bring your kids along.
Fantastic. There is, though, you know, obviously you're one of the handful of information security people with over 100,000 followers, and sometimes things go a little bit sideways. Have you sort of how have you navigated the fact that out of your sample size, not everyone is always going to be happy with Troy Hunt?
Yeah.
How do you manage it?
Look, I think over the last couple of years, I've just come to the realization that you're never going to keep everyone happy. And if you do, you're probably pretty bloody boring. You know, so yeah. It's almost become a measure. It's like, well, everyone liked something I did. Was it actually any good? So look, my rough measure is that I'm okay with, for argument's sake, like 1% of people being unhappy with something I've said or something I've done. So that's fine. Right. And it doesn't matter what I can do the most wonderful thing in the world and someone will be upset about it. So you know that's okay. I think for me the difficulties is what happens when it's what happens if it's say 10% of the feedback is negative. Well, then I've got to sort of look at it and go, well, hang on a moment, like was this just my compass being a little bit off? And there's been occasions where I've said things that didn't come across well, and I've had to retract and sort of go, hang on a moment, this is my fault. Didn't sound very good. You know, let me try and fix that. So I think a little bit of humility and acknowledging that sometimes you're just going to screw stuff up as well.
I think that's incredibly great advice, and certainly I think that many people, myself included, look at you as quite a leader in the space and mentor. So, you know, I think that's really important to understand that we're, you know, humans behind the keyboards, and at the end of the day, we're doing the best we can. So I guess we're getting close to the end, Troy. Is there anything that you want to talk about or that I haven't really covered?
No, look, I mean, I think just as my sort of general observation for the year in life in general, I think it's just a really fulfilling industry to be a part of, and I'd encourage everyone to sort of get out there beyond what is on the internet as well. One of the things that I've certainly done this year is really try to reduce my my Twitter footprint. And probably increase my IRL footprint. Now, mind you, I get in trouble for that because people say I'm killing the ozone by flying too much. So again, you're never going to keep everyone happy. But I think actually going out and having experiences with people is really, really valuable, and trying to just sort of detach yourself from 280 character discussions through to whether it be having a beer or coffee or whatever your thing of choice is, actually having some social interaction with people. There's a lot of wonderful people out there, and discussions happen in person that just never happen online.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think, though, that there's been an improvement in the press's coverage of information security issues, or do you kind of feel that they still don't quite get it?
Look, I think you've got to be selective. I mean, there's some really, really good, high-quality infosec journalists out there. Yeah, a lot of people I've worked with before, like Zach Whitaker or Joseph Cox or Lorenzo, or folks like that who really, really understand the industry and write very balanced pieces. I guess where the big challenge comes is what about the consumer-facing media? So what about the stuff that my mum and dad read with
Yeah.
some journo who's going to write about everything from the bushfires in Australia at the moment through to the cybers? How do they represent things? And like the immediate thing that comes to mind is things like the Disney Plus accounts recently. Remember in the news just a few weeks ago, it was like, oh, Disney Plus is hacked. Disney Plus is hacked. And so, well, actually, a whole bunch of people chose really bad passwords that they used everywhere else. They had account takeover attempts. So,
and Microsoft just came out with a similar report on what was it, 44 million accounts.
That's it. Yeah, something like that. 44 million people just reuse the credentials across data breaches in Microsoft accounts. So, yeah, this sort of brings us back again to the frontier that is the humans. Like no matter how good we do our digital security, it's like some human's going to come along and screw it up. So that keeps it interesting, doesn't it?
All right. Well, on that note, Troy, thank you so much for making the time and the effort to spend with us. Really appreciate it. And certainly bon voyage, and enjoy your vacation or / work vacation, as the case may be.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Appreciate the call.
All right. Well, we want to thank Troy again, and his support for the beer farmers and the Many Hats Club has been with us for a very long time, and truly great that he could join us. So we're going to cut the feed for about 5 minutes, and then when we come back, we'll be with Al Jaffe de Sécurité. So very excited to talk to him, especially around his work with something called the Diana Initiative. So we'll be back in about 5 minutes.